Hello, my name is Evan, 22 years old. I'm a senior at the University of California, living in a tiny apartment on the outskirts of the city, where the smell of burnt coffee from the neighbor downstairs wafts up every morning. I'm not the type to ramble on about myself, but if I had to, I'd say I'm just an ordinary guy, trying to survive my college years with a pile of bills and dreams that haven't quite taken shape. I do well enough in school to keep a partial scholarship, but the rest of my life, it feels like a chess game where I'm always a few moves behind. I grew up in a small town near San Francisco, where everyone knew each other, and family secrets were carefully tucked away behind polite smiles. From the outside, my family looked like a model one. My father, Alan, is an accountant with a sharp gaze and a habit of tapping his fingers on the table when stressed. My mother, Victoria, is a sharp-witted woman who always knows how to make those around her feel small with just a glance or a subtle remark. They live in a comfortable house, not overly extravagant, but enough for outsiders to think we were well off. I used to believe that too, until I realized the truth is never as simple as it appears. I have a younger brother, Miles, 2 years my junior. He's studying at a university in Oregon, a few hundred miles away from me. Miles is the kind of person who can make you smile, whether he's telling a bland story or spilling coffee on your shirt. But don't let his carefree demeanor fool you. Miles is struggling just like me, juggling rent, tuition, and student loans that pile up like a mountain. We often call each other late at night when we're both exhausted from our part-time jobs. "Evan, do you ever think we'll break out of this cycle?" Miles asked me once, his voice weary over the phone. I couldn't answer because I don't know myself. Then there are my grandparents, who warm my heart just by thinking of them. They live in a small village in France where they moved 6 years ago after retiring. My grandfather, Henri, is a tall man with white hair and a kind smile. My grandmother, Elise, is petite, sprightly, and full of endless stories about her youth. When Miles and I were kids, our grandparents were our entire world. We spent whole summers at their house, running around in the park, playing chess on an old wooden board and learning our first French phrases. My grandmother would pat my head and say, "Life is an adventure, don't be afraid of anything." I remember those words like an old song echoing in my mind, but what I remember most is my grandparents' promise. One time, when I was about 10, scribbling drawings on the floor, my grandmother pulled Miles and me close. "Listen, you two," she said, her voice serious but warm. "Your grandfather and I will make sure that when you grow up, you won't have to worry about your education. Just chase your dreams, all right?" I nodded, not fully understanding, but the look in her eyes made me believe everything would be okay. Later, I found out that my grandparents had set up an education trust fund worth $300,000 for Miles and me, with the condition that it could only be used for schooling. They entrusted its management to my parents before moving to France. I never knew about the fund until I graduated high school. From the outside, my family looks like a perfect picture. Weekend dinners, radiant Christmas card photos, stories of summer vacations. But if you look closely, you'll see the cracks. My parents aren't the type to yell or argue in front of others. They hide our family's issues with remarkable finesse. My mother has a way of speaking that makes you feel like you've done something wrong, even when you haven't. "Evan, you should be grateful for what your parents do for you," she'd often say, her voice soft but sharp as a blade. My father is silent, but his silence is like a stone wall, cold and impenetrable. Miles and I grew up in that atmosphere, always sensing something was off but never daring to ask. My college years began like a dream. When I received the acceptance letter from UC Berkeley, I sat on the living room sofa, reading it over and over, my heart pounding. The partial scholarship I was awarded was my greatest pride, but it also marked the start of a journey I was utterly unprepared for. Tuition, textbooks, rent, everything added up faster than I expected. The scholarship only covered a portion, and I had to figure out the rest on my own. I didn't want to ask my parents for help, not out of pride, but because every time I mentioned money, my mother would give me a look that made me feel like I was asking for something that wasn't mine. "You need to learn to be independent, Evan," she'd say, her voice calm but making me feel small. So I started working part-time. My first job was at the university library. I pushed a cart of books through towering shelves, reshelving books that students left scattered. The job was easy, but it paid only $12 an hour, nowhere near enough to get through the month. I remember early mornings when sunlight streamed through the library windows, and I'd shelve books while mentally reviewing the previous day's lecture. But then the electric bill arrived, followed by rent, and I realized I needed to earn more. So I took another job at an Italian restaurant near campus, where the smell of garlic and tomato sauce clung to my clothes every night. Waiting tables was no walk in the park. The restaurant was always packed with all kinds of customers, from romantic couples to rowdy groups of students ordering beers late into the night. I learned to smile even when I was scolded for delivering food too slowly or when someone forgot to tip. Some nights I'd get home at 2 in the morning, my feet aching, only to sit at my desk with a cold cup of coffee trying to finish an essay before dawn. I didn't complain because I knew I had no choice. But sometimes, lying on my narrow bed in my cramped apartment, I wondered if all this effort was worth it. Miles, my younger brother, wasn't faring much better. He is studying graphic design at a public university in Oregon, a short flight away from me. Miles was always the optimist, but during our late-night calls, I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. "Evan, I just worked a night shift at the convenience store," he'd say, his voice hoarse over the phone. "Some drunk guy knocked over a whole shelf of beer and I had to clean it up until 3 in the morning. I laughed, but my heart felt heavy. Miles also had a scholarship, but like me, he had to work to make ends meet. He worked at a convenience store near his campus, and sometimes when his paycheck fell short, he'd call me. "Evan, can I borrow $200 for rent? I swear I'll pay you back." I always sent the money, even though I was counting pennies to buy groceries. We never told our parents about these struggles. It wasn't that we didn't want to, but every time Miles or I tried to bring it up, the response was always the same. "You have to take care of yourself, don't rely on anyone," my father would say, not looking up from his newspaper. My mother was sharper. "Do you think your parents can give you everything? Life doesn't work that way." I didn't understand why they said these things. I knew we weren't rich, but my parents lived in a nice house, drove new cars, and my mother always had expensive handbags. I thought at the very least they could help a little. But every time I considered asking, my mother's look silenced me. Once I mustered the courage to ask her about the education fund my grandparents had mentioned. It was a summer evening when I was home for a visit. We were having dinner and I tried to bring it up as casually as possible. "Mom, I remember Grandma and Grandpa saying something about a fund for me and Miles' education. Do you know anything about that?" The air in the room suddenly grew heavy. My father stopped chewing and looked at my mother. She set her fork down and smiled, but it was a smile as cold as ice. "Evan, your grandparents are old. Their memories aren't what they used to be. Don't bother them with such things. You should focus on studying and working, not dreaming about money." My face burned, as if I'd been slapped. I didn't ask again, but her words haunted me. Something felt wrong, but I didn't dare dig deeper. The college years passed in a whirlwind of exhaustion and hope. I worked hard to keep my grades up, not just for the scholarship, but to prove to myself that I could do it. I dreamed of a day when, after graduation, I'd land a good job, pay off my debts, and maybe even help Miles. But reality was far harsher. Some months I had to choose between buying textbooks or paying the electric bill. Some nights I ate instant noodles for 3 days straight because my wallet held only a few coins. I didn't share these struggles with anyone, not even Miles, because I didn't want him to worry. But sometimes when he called to tell me he'd worked an extra shift to buy new shoes because his old ones were falling apart, a silent anger welled up inside me. Anger at whom? I wasn't sure. Maybe my parents, maybe myself, for not being strong enough to change things. One of my clearest memories is of a freezing winter night, standing in the Italian restaurant, balancing a tray full of wine glasses. The place was packed, and I'd been running back and forth for 4 hours straight. A customer, a middle-aged man in a suit, called me over to complain that his steak was cold. I apologized, took the plate to be reheated, but when I returned, he was still dissatisfied. "What kind of service is this?" he barked in front of his table of friends. I could only bow my head, smile, and apologize again. When I got back to the kitchen, my hands were shaking, not from anger, but because I felt so pathetically small. That night, when I got home, I sat in the dark and wondered if this was all I was capable of. Miles had similar stories. Once he told me about getting chewed out by his convenience store manager for messing up an order. "Evan, I just want to quit my job and drop out," he said, his voice nearly breaking. I wanted to fly to Oregon right then, hug him, and tell him everything would be okay. But all I could do was sit on the other end of the line, trying to offer words of comfort. I didn't fully believe myself. "Keep going, Miles. We'll get through this," I said, though my heart was full of doubt. We never truly doubted our parents, not really. We grew up believing they loved us, even if in their cold, distant way. But as we got older, I felt an invisible gap growing between us. Their words like, "Take care of yourself" or "Don't rely on anyone," weren't just lessons. They were like a wall separating us from them. My final year of college, my 4th year at UC Berkeley, was a journey filled with endless long days. I had grown accustomed to the frenetic pace, late-night work shifts, rushed essays, and short, interrupted sleeps punctuated by the blare of my alarm clock. But despite the exhaustion, I felt I was getting closer to the finish line. I had completed most of my required courses, my grades were still good enough to keep my scholarship, and I started dreaming of a stable job after graduation. I imagined paying off my student loans, renting a decent apartment, and maybe even helping Miles escape the struggles he was facing. But life, as I had learned, rarely goes according to plan. Miles, now in his 2nd year in Oregon, was no longer the carefree younger brother I once knew. During our late-night calls, I noticed his voice growing heavier, as if each word carried a weight. "Evan, I'm not sure I can keep going," he said one freezing winter night as I sat in my small apartment clutching a cup of cold tea. I paused, set the cup down, and felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean, Miles? What's wrong?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He was silent for a moment, then sighed. "School, work, money, and it's all crushing me. I'm working 5 shifts a week at the convenience store, and it's still not enough. I don't know how I'm going to pay for next semester's tuition. I'm thinking about dropping out." His words hit me like a punch to the chest. I couldn't believe it. Miles, my little brother who always smiled through tough times, was talking about giving up on his dreams. "Miles, don't say that," I replied, my voice trembling. "You're just tired. We'll figure something out. I'll help you." But Miles only let out a hollow laugh, an empty sound. "Help how, Evan? You're struggling just as much as I am, don't you see? We keep running, but we're not getting anywhere." I wanted to argue, to tell him everything would be okay, but I couldn't find words convincing enough, because I was caught in the same cycle, working, studying, paying off debts, and hoping that one day things would get easier. In the weeks that followed, I tried to check in with Miles more often. I sent him some money from my meager savings, even though it meant cutting my own expenses to the bare minimum. I called, texted, and tried to encourage him. "Miles, you're so smart, you just need to push through a little longer," I said during one call, trying to instill in him the hope I was struggling to hold on to myself. But each time we talked, I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. He spoke of nights when he slept only 3 hours because he had to finish assignments after work, of being berated by his convenience store manager for dozing off, of standing in front of the mirror and questioning what he was doing with his life. One evening, after coming home from work, my phone buzzed. It was Miles. I picked up, hoping to hear a spark of energy in his voice, but it was eerily calm. "Evan, I've made up my mind. I'm dropping out. I can't do this anymore." My heart stopped. "Miles, you can't do that," I nearly shouted. "You're only in your 2nd year. If you quit now, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." But Miles cut me off, his voice strangely composed. Evan, I've thought it through. I don't want to live like this anymore. I'll find a full-time job, pay off my debts, and, I don't know, maybe start over later. I tried to convince him, practically begging. I told him about the hardships I'd overcome, how I'd wanted to give up too, but kept going. Miles, I know it's tough, but if you drop out now, you'll lose everything you've worked for. But Miles just stayed silent, then said, Evan, I'm tired. I'm not as strong as you. The call ended and I sat there, staring at the dark phone screen, feeling like I'd lost a part of myself. The days that followed were a blur. In class, I stared at the professor lecturing while my mind wandered. At the restaurant, I dropped glasses, forgot orders, and got scolded by the manager. My thoughts were consumed with Miles. I wondered if there was anything I could do to change his decision. I considered flying to Oregon to confront him in person, but I didn't have money for a plane ticket, and my schedule was too packed. I felt powerless, as if I were watching my brother slip through my fingers. A week later, Miles called to confirm he had submitted his withdrawal form. I talked to my academic advisor, he said, his voice flat. They said I can come back later if I want, but right now I need a break. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to be angry, to blame him for giving up, but I couldn't. I knew the pressure he was under, the bills, the endless shifts, the feeling that the whole world was against him. I only wished I could do something, anything, to help him. I started questioning myself. Had I not been attentive enough? Had I been so focused on my own life that I didn't notice Miles slipping away? I replayed the times he'd called, his voice heavy with exhaustion, and how I'd responded with empty encouragements. Keep going, Miles. It'll be okay. Those words now echoed in my head like an accusation. I wondered if there was something bigger, something deeper pushing Miles to this decision. Had our parents, with their cold words, made him feel unworthy of his dreams? I decided to call my mother, though I knew it might not change anything. Mom, Miles is planning to drop out, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. He's exhausted. Can you help him? I hoped even just a little that she'd offer financial support or at least talk to him, but she only sighed over the phone. Miles is grown. He has to take responsibility for his choices. We can't keep taking care of you forever. My blood boiled. Mom, he's only 20. He's struggling to pay tuition. How can you say that? But she cut me off, her voice icy. Don't blame us. If Miles isn't strong enough, that's his problem. I hung up, my hands shaking with anger. That night, I lay in bed staring at the stained ceiling, trying to find a way out. I thought about my grandparents, about their promise that we wouldn't have to worry about education. I wondered where that education fund they'd mentioned was now. Had they forgotten? Or had they only said it to encourage us? A mix of doubt began to creep into my heart. Had my grandparents truly forgotten? Or were my parents hiding something? No, it couldn't be. I quickly pushed those doubts aside. I trusted my parents. No matter how they were the ones who raised us. Surely they would do what was best for us. I thought about calling my grandparents. It was probably morning or afternoon in France. They might be awake, but what would I say? Ask them for money? Blame them for forgetting? I couldn't do that. They were both in their 70s now, and bringing up money with them felt impossible. I started making a plan. I would finish my final year, graduate with the best grades possible, and then find a way to help Miles return to school. I didn't know how, but I swore to myself that I wouldn't let my brother drown in despair. The final months of the school year, I threw myself into studying and working like a machine. Each day was an unending cycle. Mornings in class, afternoons in the library, evenings waiting tables at the Italian restaurant. I cut out everything unnecessary. No coffee shop visits, no new clothes, no hanging out with friends. Every dollar I saved went into a separate account, hoping one day it would be enough to help Miles return to school. My calls with Miles grew less frequent. He had officially dropped out and started working full-time at a retail store in Oregon. The job's fine, Evan, he said over the phone, but his voice was hollow, as if he were trying to convince himself. I knew Miles wasn't happy. He used to dream of becoming a graphic designer, sending me beautiful sketches he'd drawn. But now, he spent his days stocking shelves and dealing with difficult customers. Every time I thought about it, my heart ached. I wanted to do something, anything, to pull him out of that abyss. In May of that year, my graduation day finally arrived. I stood in a long line of students in black gowns, square caps perched on our heads, feeling both proud and exhausted. I had done it, graduated with honors, invited to give a speech at the ceremony. As I stepped onto the stage, looking out at the packed auditorium, I was stunned to see them, Grandpa Henri and Grandma Elise, sitting in the front row, beaming with radiant smiles. I nearly broke into tears. I don't clearly recall whether my feelings at that moment were gratitude or a sense of resentment. All I remember is that seeing them, I wanted to run to them, hug them tightly, and pour out all the grievances of my and my brother's 4 years of college. That day, not only were my grandparents there, but Miles had also taken time off work to attend. He sat a few rows behind them, his hair messy but still managing a smile. My parents, Alan and Victoria, were there too, seated near the back, their faces calm as if they hadn't noticed my grandparents' return. My speech was brief but heartfelt. I spoke about my journey, the sleepless nights, the grueling work shifts, and the belief that education was the only path to a better life. I didn't mention Miles, but every word was for him, a silent promise that I wouldn't abandon him. As I stepped off the stage, applause filled the room and I felt a flicker of relief. I had made it. I had done it. After the speech, the students took turns receiving their diplomas. When my name was called, Grandpa Henry unexpectedly stood up and walked onto the stage holding a small gift box. Tall and imposing, his white hair gleaming under the lights, his kind smile took me back to those summer days in the park with him. He hugged me, then spoke into the microphone, his voice playful but full of pride. "Evan, you've made your grandparents so proud. That education fund we set up must have helped a bit, right?" He winked, and the audience laughed, thinking it was just a loving grandfather's joke. But I froze, as if the floor had collapsed beneath me. "What fund?" I asked, my voice soft but caught by the microphone. The laughter in the auditorium faded. I looked at Grandpa Henri, then at Miles, who sat up straight, his eyes wide. My parents in the rows below, already tense from seeing Grandpa, now looked pale and ashen. My mother lowered her head and my father coughed, trying to act normal. "What fund, Grandpa?" I repeated louder this time, unable to hide my shock. Grandpa Henri frowned, his smile vanishing. He looked at me, his voice lowering with suspicion. "The Education Trust Fund, Evan. We set it up for you and Miles, $300,000 to cover tuition and living expenses. Didn't your parents tell you?" The auditorium seemed to hold its breath. I felt blood rushing to my head, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. "My parents never told me anything," I said, my voice trembling. "I paid for school with my scholarship and part-time jobs. I worked at a restaurant until 2 in the morning, and Miles..." I stopped, looking at my brother, seeing him bow his head, his shoulders shaking. "Miles had to drop out because he couldn't afford it." The atmosphere in the auditorium grew heavy. A few people whispered, but I didn't care. I just looked at Grandpa Henry, watching his expression shift from surprise to anger. He stepped off the stage, searching for my parents. Then he marched straight to them, his voice sharp and cold. "Alan, Victoria, explain yourselves. Where's the trust fund money? Where's the money for my grandchildren?" My father stood, trying to stay calm. "Dad, it's not what you think. We used the money to support the kids, but..." He faltered, unable to find convincing words. My mother cut in, her voice urgent. "Dad, don't make a scene here. Can we talk about this at home?" She looked at Grandpa Henri, then at me, her eyes almost pleading. But he didn't budge. "No," he said, his voice firm. "I want the truth right now. What did you do with that money?" My mother opened her mouth but said nothing. My father lowered his head, silent, as if admitting there was no explanation that could salvage the situation. The auditorium began to buzz with curious glances directed at my family. My face burned, not from embarrassment, but from a rising tide of anger. But I knew if this continued here in front of hundreds of students and their families, the graduation ceremony would turn into an unwanted spectacle. Grandpa Henri seemed to realize this too. He took a deep breath, his eyes still icy, but he nodded at my mother. "Fine," he said, his voice low but commanding. "We'll talk outside. I don't want to ruin Evan's day." Grandma Elise and Miles stood up and followed Grandpa outside. My parents quietly trailed behind, avoiding everyone's eyes. I stood there, clutching my diploma, feeling as if the world had just crumbled. The applause resumed as another student went up to receive their diploma, but I heard nothing. I just wanted to run after my family to understand what was happening. After completing the diploma ceremony, I quickly left the stage, practically running through the rows of seats to get outside. The university had organized an outdoor reception to celebrate the graduation. The atmosphere was festive and vibrant, tables draped in white cloths, trays of fragrant food, and jazz music playing from a small band. Students and their families laughed, hugged, took photos, and raised glasses in celebration. Red and yellow balloons floated overhead, and sunlight made everything sparkle like a perfect painting. But to me, it was all a blurry backdrop, starkly contrasting the storm raging in my heart. I found my grandparents and Miles standing in a secluded corner near a row of trees far from the noisy crowd. Grandpa Henri was saying something, his voice low and intense, gesturing sharply as if emphasizing each word. Grandma Elise stood beside him, one arm around Miles, her eyes red and teary. Miles kept his head down, his shoulders trembling as if holding back his emotions. I looked around but didn't see my parents. "Grandpa, Grandma, Miles," I called, hurrying toward them. "Where are Mom and Dad?" Grandma Elise turned to me, her eyes a mix of anger and pain. "They left early," she said, her voice choked. "They're probably ashamed, Evan. They didn't want to face us." Grandpa Henri snorted, his gaze still icy. "Ashamed?" he repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "They should be. But running away like this solves nothing." I stood there, feeling the ground shift beneath me. "What did they say before they left, Grandpa?" I asked, my voice trembling. He shook his head, just that they'd explain later that it was a misunderstanding. "But I don't believe them." He paused, looking at me and Miles. "Tell us, you two. Everything." I took a deep breath, trying to organize the chaos in my mind. Then I told them about the grueling college years, the exhausting work shifts, the nights I survived on instant noodles because I couldn't afford food. I talked about Miles, how he had to drop out due to financial pressure, how he called me, his voice heavy with exhaustion and despair. Miles stood beside me, silent, but I saw him clench his fists as if each word I spoke reopened a wound. Grandma Elise hugged Miles tighter, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Oh, my dear grandchildren," she whispered. "Why didn't you tell us? Why did you let things go this far?" Miles finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "I didn't want to bother you. Mom said you were old, that we shouldn't ask about money. I thought I had to handle it myself." My heart sank hearing those words. They were the same ones Mom had said to me, the words that kept me silent all those years. Grandpa Henri slammed his fist on a nearby table, startling a few people nearby. "Enough," he said, his voice full of fury. "We trusted our children, thought they'd do right by you. Turns out we were wrong." He turned to me, his eyes softening but still resolute. "Evan, Miles, we'll get to the bottom of this. We won't let you be shortchanged." I nodded, unsure what to say. I looked around, seeing my classmates laughing, taking photos, enjoying the moment I had worked so hard for. I wanted to join in, to feel the joy I'd earned. But I couldn't. The truth had just shattered like an irreparable crack, and I knew my family would never be the same. Grandma Elise wiped her tears and took my and Miles's hands. "Today is your day, Evan," she said, her voice trying to sound cheerful. "Let's stay here and celebrate you. Don't let this ruin your special day." I looked at her, then at Miles, who gave a small nod. "Okay, Grandma," I said, though my heart was still heavy. We walked to a table, grabbed some plates of food and glasses of juice, trying to blend into the lively atmosphere. Grandpa Henry told a few amusing stories from France, trying to make us laugh. But I knew he was masking his anger. Miles tried to join in, talking about photos he took at the party, but his voice remained somber. As the reception wound down, the four of us got into my grandparents' rental car heading toward my parents' house. No one spoke for the first few minutes, only the steady hum of the engine and Grandma Elise's soft sighs. I sat next to Miles in the back, sensing his tension. "Evan," he whispered, "this is real, isn't it? They really took our money?" I squeezed his hand and nodded. "I don't know for sure, Miles, but I promise we'll find out." Grandpa Henri from the driver's seat turned to look at us. "Evan, Miles," he said, his voice low but steady. "We won't let this slide. We need answers, and we'll make sure you get justice." Grandma Elise nodded, still holding Miles' hand tightly. "We promised to take care of you, and we failed. But from now on, things will be different." The car rolled through the darkness, city lights flashing past the windows. I stared outside, feeling a small flame ignite in my chest. The truth had come to light, and though it was painful, I knew this was the first step toward changing everything. For me, for Miles, and for the promise my grandparents had spent their lives keeping. After about 30 minutes of driving, we arrived at my parents' well-appointed house. I glanced at Miles beside me, seeing him clench his fists, his eyes filled with a mix of sadness and resolve. My grandparents stepped out of the car, Grandpa Henri leading with a determined stride, while Grandma Elise held my hand, as if trying to pass some strength to me. The air was so heavy it felt hard to breathe, as if the whole world was bracing for an explosion. As we entered the house, the savory aroma of food wafted from the kitchen. My mother, Victoria, had prepared a lavish dinner. The table set with a pristine white tablecloth, plates of roasted meat, salad, and an expensive bottle of wine she usually saved for special occasions. She stood at the kitchen door wearing an apron, forcing a strained smile. "You're all here?" she said, her voice attempting cheerfulness. "I've made dinner. Sit down. Let's talk calmly." My father stood behind her, tapping his fingers on the table, a familiar sign of his stress. But Grandpa Henry didn't return her smile. He marched straight into the living room, his eyes icy. "Calmly," he repeated, his voice low but seething with anger. "Victoria, how can there be calm when you and Alan betrayed our trust? When you stole the future of your own children?" Grandma Elise stood beside him, her eyes red, but she said nothing, only staring at my mother as if trying to fathom how a mother could do something so terrible to her children. My mother's face paled, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice trembling. "We used the money to support the family, to keep things stable. Evan and Miles didn't lack anything." My father nodded, trying to chime in. "That's right, we paid for a lot. House, cars, essentials." But his voice trailed off under Grandpa Henry's piercing gaze. I couldn't take it anymore. I stepped forward, standing between my grandparents and my parents, feeling a storm raging inside me. "Support the family?" I said, louder than I intended. "Mom, Dad, I paid for college with my scholarship and worked myself to exhaustion. I waited tables until 2 in the morning, ate instant noodles for a week because I couldn't afford food. And Miles?" I turned to my brother, seeing him bow his head, his hands clenched. "Miles had to drop out because he couldn't handle the financial pressure. If there was a fund, why didn't we see a single cent of it?" The room grew thick with tension. My mother opened her mouth, but no words came out. My father stayed silent, his eyes avoiding mine. Grandpa Henri slammed his hand on the table. "Enough!" his voice echoing through the room. "You took $300,000 that we spent our lives saving for our grandchildren. You let them live like they were homeless while you sit in this house with new cars and designer bags." He pointed at the luxury handbag on the sofa, his voice dripping with disdain. "I'll sue you. I'll let the world know how despicable you are." Grandma Elise grabbed his arm, trying to calm him, but tears streamed down her face. "Henri, calm down," she whispered, her voice full of pain. My mother started crying, not loud sobs, but silent tears, as if she knew she had no way out. "I'm so sorry," she said. "Please don't make a big deal out of this. We'll find a way to pay it back." But her words were cut off by Grandpa Henry's unyielding glare. My heart pounded, but I knew if this went any further, our family would be irreparably shattered. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, placing a hand on Grandpa Henri's shoulder. "Grandpa," I said, my voice calm but firm, "we don't need to sue. I don't want the world to know about this, not for Mom and Dad's sake, but for me and Miles. But I want justice." I turned to my parents, looking them straight in the eyes. "I want you to sign a contract to repay the full amount of the trust fund, $300,000 plus 5% annual interest within 10 years. And you need to cover all costs for Miles to return to school and complete his degree. If you don't, I won't hold back. I'll let everyone know the truth." Miles looked up, his eyes wide, as if he couldn't believe what I'd said. My mother started pleading, her voice breaking. "Evan, how can we come up with that money? You don't understand, we used it to—" But I cut her off. "Used it for what, Mom? To buy a new car? To go on vacations? Or to keep up the perfect image of this family?" My voice trembled, not from anger, but from pain. "Miles and I lived like we had nothing while you kept the money that was meant for us." My father finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "Evan, we didn't mean to hurt you. We just wanted to keep things stable." But his words sounded like a feeble excuse, not enough to quell the anger in my heart. Grandpa Henri shook his head, his eyes full of disappointment. "Stable?" he repeated. "You destroyed your children's futures for your own selfishness." Grandma Elise stood, wiping her tears. "That's enough," she said, her voice resolute. "Henri and I don't want to stay here another minute. Evan, Miles, come with us." She turned to my parents, her gaze cold. "You two figure out how to repay the trust fund." Her words cut like a knife, making my mother sob aloud while my father stood motionless. We left the house without looking back at the lavish dinner on the table. Grandpa Henri took us to an upscale restaurant downtown, where warm golden lights and soft piano music filled the air. He ordered expensive dishes, steak, lobster, wine, as if trying to make up for our years of hardship. "Today is your day, Evan," he said, raising his glass. "And from now on, your grandparents will make sure you don't have to suffer anymore." I sat there with Miles and my grandparents, feeling a strange mix of pain and hope. Miles squeezed my hand under the table, whispering, "Thank you, Evan." I smiled, though my heart was still heavy. The truth had been laid bare, and though it was painful, I knew this was the first step toward reclaiming what was ours. The meal stretched late into the night, and as we left the restaurant, stepping out under a starry sky, I felt a small flame ignite within me, not of anger but of determination. I would not let Miles or myself have our futures stolen again. The days following graduation, my grandparents decided to stay in the U.S. for an extra week. They wanted to spend time with me and Miles to make up for the years we had to struggle on our own. Grandpa Henry rented a small apartment near my school in Berkeley, and every day they visited, bringing stories, home-cooked meals, and warm hugs that I had almost forgotten from childhood. "We want to make sure you're okay," Grandma Elise said, stroking my hair as she did when I was little. I looked at her, noticing the deeper wrinkles on her face, but her eyes still shone with unwavering love. Miles stayed with me for a few days, sleeping on the old sofa in my tiny apartment. We talked a lot, the first time in months, without the weight of money or work pressing down on us. "Evan, I think I want to go back to school," Miles said one evening as we sat drinking coffee on the balcony. "But I'm scared. Scared it'll be like before." I took his hand, feeling the tremble in his voice. "It won't be like before, Miles," I said. "This time I'm here, and so are Grandma and Grandpa. You won't be alone." That week, my grandparents focused on investigating the trust fund. They contacted an old lawyer in the U.S. who had helped set it up and requested detailed bank statements. Though they didn't pursue a lawsuit against my parents as Grandpa Henri had threatened, they wanted to ensure everything was resolved transparently. I stayed out of those calls. I didn't want to dig deeper into the pain. But Grandpa Henri told me that my parents admitted to withdrawing money from the fund. They claimed they used it to maintain the family's lifestyle, but couldn't provide any concrete evidence of how the money was spent. They have no choice but to pay it back, Grandpa Henri said, his voice resolute. If they don't, I'll make sure they face the consequences. During that week, I got a call from my father. His voice over the phone sounded tired, almost unfamiliar. "Evan," he said, "we're selling the car, and we'll mortgage the house. We'll pay back the money for you and Miles." I stayed silent, unsure how to respond. Part of me wanted to scream, to ask why they did this to us, but another part just felt empty. "Good," I finally said, my voice cold. "Do the right thing, Dad." That was the last time I spoke to him for a long while. My grandparents stayed until the end of the week, and before returning to France, they called Miles and me to their rented apartment. Grandpa Henri handed us a stack of documents, copies of the contract my parents had signed, agreeing to repay the $300,000 plus 5% annual interest within 10 years. They also committed to covering all tuition and living expenses for Miles to return to school. "This isn't just about the money," Grandpa Henri said, his eyes stern. "This is our promise to you. We're sorry we let you suffer." Grandma Elise hugged us, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You're our pride and joy," she said. "Keep doing what makes you happy. Don't let the past hold you back." I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my heart. Miles nodded too, and for the first time in months I saw a spark in his eyes, a spark of hope. As my grandparents boarded their flight back to France, Miles and I stood at the airport waving goodbye. "Evan, I'm going back to school," Miles said, his voice more certain than ever. "I'll do it for you and Grandma and Grandpa." I smiled, hugging him tightly. "I know you will, Miles." In that moment, it felt like we had reclaimed a part of ourselves. Not just the money, but our belief in the future. With the trust fund money gradually being repaid, I started building my post-graduation life. I landed a job at a consulting firm in San Francisco. Not my dream job, but enough to pay off my loans and save for the future. I rented a smaller, cleaner apartment, and for the first time in years, I didn't have to worry about buying groceries or paying the electric bill. Miles, with financial support from our parents and grandparents, returned to school in Oregon. He re-enrolled in the graphic design program, and through video calls, I saw him slowly regain the carefree smile he once had. My parents, after selling the car and mortgaging the house, lived more quietly. They no longer attended community events or boasted about our perfect family as they once did. I heard they were shunned by neighbors and friends, not because we exposed the truth, but because whispers had spread. I didn't feel joy hearing this, but I didn't feel pity either. They made their choices, and now they faced the consequences. 2 years passed since graduation, and my life changed in ways I never dared to dream. I worked at the consulting firm in San Francisco, earning enough to pay off my student loans and live comfortably in a small but bright apartment downtown. Every morning I woke up, brewed coffee, and looked out my window at the skyscrapers gleaming in the sunlight. It was a strange feeling. No longer counting pennies for groceries, no more sleepless nights worrying about bills. But what made me happiest wasn't the money. It was news from Miles. Miles returned to school in Oregon, supported by the repaid trust fund and encouragement from me and our grandparents. He threw himself into his studies with a passion I hadn't seen before. Through video calls, he told me about his graphic design projects, small exhibitions he participated in, and new friends he made. "Evan, I think I've found myself again," he said, his smile radiant on the screen. Every time I heard those words, it felt like a piece of my heart was healing. In May of that year, I flew to Oregon for Miles's graduation. As the plane landed, my heart pounded, not from nerves, but from pride. I had watched my brother walk through darkness, from the days he wanted to give up to now, standing on stage with a diploma in hand. I sat in the front row of the auditorium, clapping until my hands hurt when Miles's name was called. He walked onto the stage, his curly hair still as messy as ever, but his eyes shone brightly. When he looked down and saw me, he waved, his grin ear to ear. I stood up shouting, "Great job, Miles!" making a few people around me laugh. After the ceremony, I ran to hug him. "Congrats, hero," I said, echoing the words he'd said to me 2 years earlier. Miles laughed, hugging me tightly. "Thanks, Evan. I wouldn't be here without you." His words choked me up. We stood there amidst the crowd of students and families, feeling a bond no words could capture. Our grandparents, now frailer, couldn't fly from France to attend, but right after the ceremony, as Miles and I celebrated at a coffee shop near campus, my phone buzzed. It was Grandma Elise, video calling from their small village in France. Grandpa Henri sat beside her, looking thinner than the last time I saw him, but his smile was as warm as ever. "Miles, you've made us so proud," Grandma Elise said, her voice trembling with emotion. Grandpa Henry nodded, adding, "Both of you are our treasures. Never forget that." Miles leaned closer to the screen, his eyes red. "Thank you, Grandma and Grandpa. I promise I won't let you down." I noticed our parents didn't attend Miles's graduation. I had sent an invitation but received no reply. Part of me hoped they'd show up, if only to witness this moment, but I wasn't surprised by their absence. Miles didn't mention them, but I knew he felt the void. "They're still ashamed, aren't they?" he asked later as we sat on a bench outside the campus looking at the remaining balloons from the celebration. I nodded, not wanting to dwell on the pain. "Maybe, Miles, but today is your day. Don't let them dim your joy." After Miles's graduation, I used my work connections to find job opportunities for him. A client of mine, Anna, who was the director of a major design firm, happily agreed to my request. I sent Miles's portfolio to her, along with a personal recommendation. Within weeks, Miles was hired as an intern and quickly impressed with his creative designs. "Evan, I love this job," he told me over the phone, his voice brimming with excitement. "I feel like I'm living my dream." Hearing those words, I smiled, feeling that a part of our journey had been rewarded. 3 years later, Miles and I sat down to talk about the future. "Evan, I think we should do something," he said, his eyes sparkling. "Something meaningful." And so the idea for a charitable foundation was born. We called it the Henri and Elise Foundation, aimed at supporting struggling low-income students, especially those without family financial support. I reached out to nonprofit organizations, leveraging my work connections, while Miles designed the foundation's logo and website. Within months, the foundation gained support from numerous donors, from Berkeley alumni to local business people. The most surprising moment came when I received a letter from our parents. They included a sum of money with a note. "We know we can't undo our mistakes, but we want to contribute to your foundation. We hope you can forgive us." I read the letter, feeling a mix of pain and relief. I called Miles and read it to him. "I don't know if I can forgive them yet," he said, his voice heavy with sadness. "But I think I want to try." I nodded over the phone. "Me too, Miles." The Henri and Elise Foundation grew beyond our expectations. We awarded scholarships to dozens of students each year, hosted workshops on personal finance, and provided counseling for those facing financial abuse from family. Every time I saw a student receive a scholarship, I thought of Grandpa Henry, his promise, and I knew his legacy lived on through us. Looking back, I realized that the most painful thing in my life, my parents' betrayal, was also what made me strongest. My grandparents were the ones who truly cared for me and Miles, and I knew we would always have each other no matter what. If I could send a message to anyone reading this story, it would be this: never give up, even when you feel like you're fighting alone. There will be days when you want to quit, like Miles did, like I once considered. But find the people who believe in you, who will hold your hand in the dark. And if your family or anyone else is holding you back, remember that you deserve a better future. Don't be afraid to stand up and claim what's yours, because sometimes the truth, however painful, is the key to unlocking a new door. I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, looking down at San Francisco's glittering lights. Miles was in Oregon, building his own career. Our grandparents in France now called us regularly with love and encouragement. I smiled, taking a deep breath of the cool night air. It was ironic. The thing that hurt me most was what made me strongest. And on a day that seemed like an ending, I found a brighter new beginning.